The greatest throne in the world has never been empty throughout history. In war and in peace, in the age of heroes and in the times of ancient civilizations, in every event among the gods, vengeance, betrayal, and alliance, that throne never stood vacant, never could. This throne is not what you might think. Not the magnificent throne of mighty Zeus at the center of his great hall. But not far from it either. Right beside it. The throne that has remained in place for thousands of years, still refusing to be moved. Beginning in ancient times, the Greeks carved her image into marble, adorned their vases with her likeness. They even built temples in her honor at Argos and Samos, at Olympia and Mycenae. In their moments of joy, at births and weddings, they whispered her name for good fortune. When they understood that what a person values most is the bond with their loved ones. When they realized that life exists between one breath, one word, and the next, they called her the Queen of the Heavens. They knew her as the goddess of union, of marriage, especially of women, and of the sacred bonds that held civilizations together. Today we know her as the opposite of all these things, that she was jealous, that she was wrathful, the one who hunted down her husband's lovers, the women he betrayed her with, delivering the cruelest punishments to the most innocent parties in affairs where they had no say. We know her through a rage that would never subside, a wound of the heart that would never heal. The stories changed her very existence. They took everything beautiful about her and transformed it into catastrophe, into an evil goddess. From a goddess to whom people once offered prayers and placed their hopes, they turned her into a maddened deity consumed by suffering and fury. Of course, stories diminish and change over time. They told us what the goddess Hera did and whom she punished, but not why. They don't explain the reason beneath her rage. They judge her but never consider who she was or her position. A position so impossible, so carefully constructed to deny her every good option, that her rage begins to look less like madness and more like the only sane response to an insane situation. Tonight, we return to the beginning. We trace her journey from the darkness of her father's belly to the throne of heaven. We witness the marriage that should have been sacred and the betrayals that turned it into a prison. We watch a goddess who deserved better fight for dignity in a universe that seemed determined to deny it to her. If you think this is a story about jealousy, you would be wrong. This is a story about what happens when you deserve respect but don't receive it, and you're not powerful enough to demand it. A marriage where one side forgets every vow while the other must simply smile and endure. This is a story of survival, of holding on to yourself when everything conspires to erase you. In this story, we come to know the goddess Hera anew. And by the end, you may discover that the goddess you thought you knew has been hiding in plain sight all along, waiting for someone to finally see her clearly. Let us begin in the only place such a story can begin. In darkness, in imprisonment, in the belly of a father who feared his own children more than anything else in the universe. The world before the Olympians was a world of giants. The Titans ruled, beings of immense elemental power who had overthrown their own father to claim dominion over all existence. At their head sat Kronos, lord of time, wielder of the great scythe that had unmade Uranos and claimed the cosmos for a new generation. Kronos had once been a liberator. He had freed his siblings from the darkness where Uranos had imprisoned them. He had led the rebellion that broke the old order and established the new. For a time, his reign was called the Golden Age, an era of peace and plenty when even mortals lived without toil or sorrow. But power changes those who hold it, and Kronos, who had seen what a son could do to a father, who had wielded the blade that castrated Uranos and cast his severed flesh into the sea, could not escape the fear that the same fate awaited him. The prophecy came from Gaia herself, the Earth Mother who had helped Kronos overthrow Uranos and who now watched her son with ancient, patient eyes. She told him what he already suspected. His reign would not last. A child of his own blood would rise against him, would defeat him, would claim the throne of heaven for a new generation of gods. Kronos heard the prophecy and made his choice. He would not wait for the threat to mature. He would not give his children the chance to grow strong enough to challenge him. He would contain them before they became dangerous, trap them in a prison from which there could be no escape. When his wife Rhea bore their first child, Kronos took the infant from her arms and swallowed it whole. The baby did not die. Gods cannot die so easily. Instead, it continued to exist within the Titan's body, conscious but constrained, aware but unable to act. Rhea wept. She pleaded. She raged against the cruelty of what her husband had done. But Kronos was unmoved. One by one, the children came. One by one, Kronos swallowed them. Hestia, the firstborn, gentle and warm, destined to become goddess of the hearth. Demeter, whose touch would one day make the earth bloom and wither. Hera, proud even in infancy, already containing the will that would make her queen. Hades, silent and watchful, already comfortable with darkness. Poseidon, restless even then, dreaming of vast spaces he had never seen. 5 children, 5 divine beings of immense potential, reduced to prisoners in their father's belly. They could not grow in the physical sense. Gods do not grow as mortals do. But they could be aware. They could experience the passage of time in that cramped darkness, could know that they existed without being able to do anything about it. For Hera, this imprisonment was formative in ways the myths rarely explore. In that darkness, she learned what it meant to have her existence denied. She learned what it felt like to be conscious, to be powerful, to be real, and yet to be treated as nothing more than a problem to be contained. She learned that the world did not automatically recognize worth, that power did not automatically translate into freedom, that even a goddess could be reduced to irrelevance by someone stronger. Time works differently in Kronos's belly. When the gods entered that prison, they lost their sense of time. Days turned into months, months blurred into years. Years became centuries. Time lost its meaning. Hera was not alone in that prison. Her siblings were there with her, 5 divine consciousnesses sharing the same impossible space. Each existed in their own pocket of darkness, isolated even in proximity. What did Hera think about during those endless years of imprisonment? Perhaps she dreamed of freedom, of light, of a world beyond the walls of flesh that contained her. Perhaps she simply endured, learning the patience that would later allow her to sit on a throne for eternity, watching her husband's betrayals with eyes that never looked away. What we can say is this: the imprisonment changed her. When she finally emerged into the light, she would carry the darkness with her. She would never forget what it felt like to be contained, to be dismissed, to have her very existence treated as an inconvenience. She would spend the rest of eternity ensuring that she would never be so helpless again. And she would never, ever forgive those who tried to diminish her. Liberation came through the one child Kronos failed to swallow. Zeus, the youngest, had been hidden away at the moment of his birth. Rhea had wrapped a stone in swaddling clothes and presented it to Kronos as their newborn son. The Titan swallowed the stone and believed himself safe. Meanwhile, the real Zeus grew in secret. He was raised on the island of Crete, hidden in a cave on Mount Ida, nurtured by nymphs. He grew strong in body and in purpose, learning of his imprisoned siblings, learning of the prophecy his father feared, preparing himself for the confrontation that would reshape the cosmos. When Zeus finally returned to challenge Kronos, he came not as a warrior but as a servant. Disguised as a cupbearer, he served the Titan lord a special drink, a mixture of mustard and wine that the goddess Métis had prepared. The drink was an emetic, designed to force Kronos to regurgitate what he had swallowed. The effect was immediate and violent. Kronos doubled over, his body convulsing as it rejected what it had contained for so long. First came the stone, the false Zeus, tumbling from the Titan's mouth, landing with a heavy thud on the floor of his great hall. And then, one by one, came the children. They emerged not as infants but as fully formed gods. Whatever time had passed in the outside world, they had experienced it in their own way, developing in the darkness until they were ready to be born into the light. First Hestia, then Demeter, then Hera, then Hades, then Poseidon emerged. 5 gods, 5 beings of immense power, standing for the first time in the world that had been forbidden to them. Imagine what that moment must have felt like. After years of darkness, suddenly there was light. After years of confinement, suddenly there was space. The world stretched out before them in all its vastness, and they were finally free to move through it. But freedom is not the same as safety. Kronos still ruled. The Titans still held power. The newly liberated gods were free, but they were not yet victorious. The war that would determine the fate of the cosmos was only beginning. The Titanomachy lasted 10 years. Zeus and his siblings established their base on Mount Olympus. From there, they launched their campaign against Kronos and his Titan allies, who fortified themselves on Mount Othrys. The battles were cataclysmic. Mountains were thrown like stones. Earthquakes split the land. Fire rained from the sky and the seas boiled with the fury of divine combat. For years, the conflict remained deadlocked. The turning point came when Zeus freed the 100-handed ones and the Cyclopes from Tartarus. In gratitude, the Cyclopes forged weapons for the Olympian gods. For Zeus, they made the thunderbolt. For Poseidon, they forged the trident. For Hades, they crafted the helm of darkness. Armed with these new weapons, the Olympians turned the tide of the war. The final battle was fought on the plains of Thessaly, and when it was over, the Titans were broken. Kronos and his allies were cast down into Tartarus. The age of the Titans was over. The age of the Olympians had begun. In the aftermath of victory, the cosmos needed to be organized. The 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, drew lots to determine their domains. It was supposed to be fair, a random distribution of power among equals who had fought together to earn their freedom. Zeus drew the sky. He would rule the heavens, command the weather, sit as king over gods and mortals alike. His was the visible realm, the domain of light and thunder and the endless blue expanse that covered the world. Poseidon drew the seas, the oceans and rivers, the creatures that swam in them and the sailors who crossed them, all would answer to him. His was a realm of depth and mystery, of storms and calm, of life that moved in ways the land-dwellers could barely imagine. Hades drew the underworld, the realm of the dead, the final destination of every mortal soul, would be his to govern. It was not a punishment, not exactly. The underworld was vast and necessary, and ruling it was a position of genuine power. But it was also a realm of shadows, separated from the light and life that defined the world above. Notice who did not participate in this lottery. Notice whose domains were not determined by random chance but by negotiation and assumption. The goddesses Hestia, Demeter, and Hera received their powers through different means. They were given functions rather than territories, responsibilities rather than kingdoms. Their authority was real, but it was defined in relation to the male gods rather than standing independent. This was the first indication of how the new Olympian order would operate. The brothers ruled spaces. The sisters governed processes. Zeus controlled the sky, but Hera would influence what happened beneath it. Poseidon commanded the seas, but Demeter determined whether the lands those seas touched would flourish or starve. Power was shared, but it was not shared equally. The goddesses were essential, but they were not sovereign. For Hera, this structure created a fundamental tension that would define her entire mythology. She would become Queen of Olympus, the highest-ranking goddess in existence, partner to the king of all creation. But her queenship was contingent, defined in reference to Zeus rather than complete in itself. She would have power without full autonomy, status without true independence. Every conflict that followed, every act of rage and vengeance that would make her infamous, must be understood within this framework. Hera was not simply a jealous wife. She was a goddess whose position was both elevated and constrained, who possessed enough power to demand respect but not enough to guarantee it, who occupied a throne that was both glorious and impossible. The marriage of Zeus and Hera was not inevitable. The myths preserve different accounts of how it came to be, and each version reveals something about the nature of their relationship. In some tellings, Zeus pursued Hera with the same relentless desire he would later show toward countless other women. He saw her beauty, wanted her, and set about acquiring her with all the resources at his disposal. In these versions, Hera was a prize to be won, her own preferences secondary to the king's determination. In other tellings, the marriage was arranged, a political alliance between the two most powerful figures of the new divine order. Zeus needed a queen who could represent the institution of marriage, who could embody the stability and legitimacy that his rule required. Hera needed a position that matched her ambition, a throne that would give her the authority she had been denied during her long imprisonment. They came together not out of love but out of mutual advantage. But the most revealing account involves a deception. According to this tradition, Zeus wanted Hera but could not win her through direct approach. Hera was proud, perhaps already suspicious of his reputation, unwilling to become just another conquest in a growing list. She refused his advances, maintained her distance, made it clear that she would not be easily claimed. So Zeus transformed himself. He became a small bird, a cuckoo, bedraggled and shivering as if caught in a terrible storm. He placed himself where Hera would find him, looking as pitiful and helpless as a creature could look. Hera found the bird. She saw its suffering and felt compassion. She picked it up, cradled it against her breast to warm it, spoke to it gently as she tried to restore its strength. In that moment, when she was focused on giving comfort, when her guard was down, Zeus revealed his true form. What happened next varies depending on the source. Some say Zeus simply declared his love and Hera, moved by the gesture, accepted him. Others say the transformation was itself a violation, that Zeus took such advantage of her compassion that she had no choice but to marry him or face shame. Either way, the implications are troubling. If this version is true, then the marriage that would define Hera's existence began with manipulation. Zeus could not win her honestly, so he tricked her. He used her kindness against her, exploited her compassion to get what he wanted. The sacred union that would become the model for mortal marriages started with a deception. Small wonder, then, that what followed was a cycle of deception and rage. The foundations were rotten from the beginning. The wedding itself was magnificent. All the gods attended. All creation rejoiced. The king and queen of heaven were united in a ceremony that would be remembered as the Hieros Gamos, the sacred marriage, the divine template for all the mortal marriages that would follow. Gaia herself gave the bride a gift, a tree that bore golden apples, so precious that it would need to be guarded by a dragon at the western edge of the world. The other gods brought their own offerings, tokens of respect and celebration for the union that would govern the cosmos. For a time, perhaps, there was happiness. The myths are silent about the early days of the marriage, and silence in mythology often indicates normalcy. There were no dramatic conflicts to report, no catastrophes that demanded divine intervention. Zeus and Hera ruled together, produced children together, established the order that would shape the world for ages to come. Their children were gods in their own right. Ares, the god of war, fierce and bloody and never quite accepted by the other Olympians. Hebe, the goddess of youth, beautiful and graceful. Eileithyia, goddess of childbirth, holding the power of life and death over every mother and child. And perhaps Hephaestus, the smith god, though some say Hera produced him alone without any father at all. For a time, perhaps, the marriage worked. For a time, the queen sat beside the king, and the universe ran according to their joint design. For a time, before the betrayals began, before the rage became the defining feature of their relationship, Zeus and Hera may have been something like partners. But that time did not last. Could not last. Because Zeus was Zeus and fidelity was not in his nature. And Hera was Hera, and acceptance of betrayal was not in hers. The first affair may have been Métis. Zeus had married her before Hera, though that marriage ended when he learned that any son she bore would be destined to overthrow him. Fearing a repetition of the cycle that had destroyed Uranos and Kronos, Zeus swallowed Métis whole, containing her within himself forever. When she gave birth inside him, he suffered terrible headaches until Hephaestus split his skull with an axe and Athena emerged fully formed. Goddess of wisdom and war, Zeus's favorite child. But Métis, if she counted, was before the marriage to Hera. The true betrayals came after, and they came relentlessly, one after another. A parade of lovers mortal and divine that stretched across centuries and continents. Let us speak of Leto, because Leto's story intertwines with Hera's in ways that cannot be separated. Leto was a Titan goddess, daughter of Zeus and Phoebe, gentle, beautiful, and utterly unprepared for the catastrophe that befell her. Zeus desired her, as Zeus desired so many. He pursued her, won her, got her pregnant with twins, and then, following his usual pattern, he moved on, leaving Leto to deal with the consequences. Those consequences were devastating. When Hera learned of Leto's pregnancy, she did not strike directly. She was cleverer than that, more patient, more willing to let suffering unfold over time. She issued a decree. No land on earth would be permitted to offer Leto shelter. No place that the sun could see, no territory under heaven's authority, would be allowed to receive the pregnant goddess. Leto wandered. She was heavy with Zeus's children, desperate for a place to rest, a place to give birth, and everywhere she went, the land refused her. Islands turned her away. Continents closed their borders. Every shore she approached hardened beneath her feet. Every city shut its gates. The goddess who had done nothing wrong except attract the king's attention found herself exiled from the entire earth. The cruelty of this punishment was its comprehensiveness. Hera did not need to chase Leto. She did not need to inflict direct violence. She simply made the world itself hostile, turned existence into a prison where the walls were made of rejection. For days, perhaps weeks, perhaps longer, Leto wandered. She was exhausted. She was in pain. The children within her demanded to be born, but there was nowhere to give birth. She was trapped between the irresistible force of her own body and the immovable object of Hera's decree. Finally, something unexpected appeared. The island of Delos was not a true island in those days. It was a floating mass of land, drifting on the sea, anchored to nothing. Because it was not fixed to the earth, it fell outside the strict terms of Hera's decree. Delos agreed to shelter Leto, and in exchange, the goddess promised that the children she bore would make the island famous throughout the world. The birth was not easy. Hera had one more torment to inflict. She restrained Eileithyia, the goddess of childbirth, Hera's own daughter. Without Eileithy's presence, labor could not properly progress. Leto was trapped again, unable to complete the birth, suspended in agony while Hera watched and waited. For 9 days, Leto labored. 9 days of suffering that served no purpose except to satisfy Hera's desire for vengeance. The contractions came in waves, each one more brutal than the last, and Leto had no choice but to endure them. She gripped the trunk of a palm tree, her fingers digging into the bark until it cracked. She screamed into the empty sky, knowing that no one would come. She felt her body tearing itself apart, and still the children would not emerge. Finally, the other goddesses could bear it no longer. They sent Iris to Olympus with a bribe, a magnificent necklace of gold and amber that caught the light like captured sunshine. Eileithyia saw the necklace and desired it. She followed Iris back to Delos, slipping away from her mother's command. The moment she arrived, everything changed. The labor that had been frozen suddenly resumed. Artemis was born first, and she turned back to help her mother through the final stages of labor, assisting in the birth of her twin brother Apollo. When it was over, when the children were finally born and Leto could rest at last, the goddess had been transformed by her ordeal. The twins would remember what had been done to their mother. Apollo and Artemis grew into formidable deities, powerful, protective, and absolutely loyal to the woman who had suffered so much to bring them into the world. Anyone who insulted Leto would face their wrath. And their wrath, when it came, was terrible. Io was not a goddess. She was a priestess of Hera herself, serving at the temple in Argos, the city most sacred to the Queen of Heaven. She was beautiful, young, devoted to her divine mistress, and Zeus wanted her. The king of the gods appeared to Io in dreams first, speaking to her in the night, telling her to come to a certain meadow, promising her his favor if she would only submit to his desire. Io was frightened. She told her father about the dreams, and he consulted oracles, seeking guidance on what his daughter should do. The oracles were unanimous. Io must go to the meadow. If she refused, Zeus would destroy her entire family with his thunderbolt. The god who ruled the universe had seen something he wanted, and he would not be denied. So Io went. She met Zeus in the meadow, and he had his way with her. But this time, Hera was watching more closely than usual. She noticed a strange cloud gathered over a field in Argos, suspiciously thick, conveniently concealing whatever was happening beneath it. She descended from Olympus to investigate. Zeus sensed her coming. In a moment of panic, he transformed Io into a white heifer, a beautiful cow with gentle eyes, standing innocently in the meadow as if she had always been there. When Hera arrived, she found her husband standing beside an unusually lovely cow, looking far too innocent for anyone to believe. Hera was not fooled. She knew exactly what had happened, but instead of confronting Zeus directly, which would have given him the opportunity to lie or deflect, she adopted a different strategy. She admired the heifer. She commented on its beauty, and she asked if she might have it as a gift. Zeus was trapped. If he refused, he would essentially be admitting that the cow was more than it appeared. If he agreed, he would be handing Io over to the goddess who had every reason to make her suffer. He hesitated, calculated, and finally agreed. Perhaps he thought he could find a way to free Io later. Hera took the white heifer and gave it to Argus Panoptes to guard. Argus was a giant with 100 eyes, and he never closed them all at the same time. Some were always watching, always vigilant. Io, trapped in the body of a cow, could not escape his surveillance. She wandered the fields, grazing on grass she did not want to eat, unable to speak, unable to explain her situation to anyone who might help her. Her father found her eventually. He did not recognize his daughter in the heifer's form, but she recognized him. She tried to speak but could only low miserably. She traced letters in the dirt with her hoof, spelling out her name, and her father understood the horror of what had happened. He embraced the heifer, weeping for the daughter who had been transformed into a beast, unable to do anything to help her. Zeus, perhaps feeling a twinge of guilt, sent Hermes to free Io. The messenger god approached Argus in disguise, playing music on his pipes, telling endless stories designed to lull the giant into sleep. One by one, the 100 eyes closed. When the last one finally shut, Hermes struck, killing Argus with a single blow. But Hera's vengeance did not end with Argus's death. When she learned that her watchman had been killed, she honored him, placing his 100 eyes on the tail of her sacred bird, the peacock. And she sent a new torment after Io, a gadfly, a stinging insect that would follow the heifer wherever she went, biting her constantly, giving her no rest. Io fled. She ran across Greece, across the sea that would later bear her name, the Ionian Sea. She ran through Asia, across deserts and mountains and rivers. The gadfly followed relentlessly, stinging and biting, driving her mad with pain and exhaustion. She could not stop. She could not rest. She could only run. Her wanderings took her eventually to Egypt, far from Greece, far from Hera's temples, far from the world she had known. There, at last, she found peace. Zeus restored her human form with a touch. She bore him a son, Epiphus, who would become the ancestor of great nations. She was worshipped as a goddess, identified with Isis, honored by people who never knew the suffering she had endured. But the years of torment could not be undone. Io had been a priestess of Hera, devoted to the goddess, and her reward for that devotion had been transformation, imprisonment, and endless pursuit. Her crime was being beautiful. Her punishment was everything a mortal could suffer while still remaining alive. Callisto's story follows a similar pattern, with its own particular cruelties. Callisto was a nymph, one of Artemis's companions, sworn to virginity like the goddess she served. She was beautiful, of course. The women who suffered at Hera's hands were always beautiful. Beauty was their crime and their doom. Zeus saw her in the forest. He wanted her, but approaching her directly would not work. Callisto had sworn herself to Artemis, had rejected all male company, would not willingly break her vows even for the king of the gods. So Zeus disguised himself. He took the form of Artemis, approaching Callisto as her trusted mistress, embracing her as a friend would embrace a friend. Callisto suspected nothing. Why would she? She was in the company of her goddess, safe and protected. The deception worked. By the time Callisto understood what was happening, it was too late. Zeus violated her in the form she trusted most, then departed, leaving her to deal with the consequences. Callisto tried to hide what had happened. She stayed with Artemis's band of hunters, pretending that nothing had changed. But bodies do not keep secrets forever. Her pregnancy began to show, and when Artemis discovered that one of her sworn virgins was carrying a child, she did not ask how it had happened. She simply cast Callisto out, stripping her of everything she had known. Alone and pregnant, Callisto gave birth to a son, Arcus. For a time, perhaps, she found some peace in motherhood. But Hera was watching, and Hera did not forgive. The queen of the gods waited until the child was born, until Callisto had something she loved, something she could lose. Then she struck. She transformed Callisto into a bear, the shape that Artemis's hunters most often pursued. The woman who had served the goddess of the hunt became the prey that the goddess's servants killed. Callisto wandered the wilderness in her bare form, unable to speak, unable to explain, hunted by the very people she had once called friends. She retained her human mind, which made the transformation even crueler. She knew what she had been. She knew what she had lost. She could only shamble through the forest, avoiding the hunters who would kill her on sight. Years passed. Arcas grew into a young man, a skilled hunter himself. He never knew what had happened to his mother. He only knew that she had vanished, leaving him alone. One day, in the forest, Arcas encountered a bear. The bear behaved strangely, approaching him instead of fleeing, looking at him with eyes that seemed to hold intelligence, recognition, even love. Arcas did not understand. He saw only a wild animal coming too close. He raised his spear. Zeus intervened at the last moment, though not out of compassion for Callisto. He did not want his son to commit the sin of matricide, to kill his own mother without knowing what he was doing. So Zeus transformed Arcas into a bear as well, and then he placed both bears in the sky, turning them into constellations. Callisto became Ursa Major, the great bear. Arcas became Ursa Minor, the little bear. They would circle the heavens forever, together but unable to touch, preserved but not restored. Hera had one final cruelty to add. She went to Oceanus and Tethys, the ancient sea gods, and asked them to forbid the bear constellations from ever setting in the sea. Other stars could rest, could dip below the horizon and refresh themselves in the waters. Callisto and Arcas would circle endlessly, never setting, never resting, denied even the small comfort of occasional darkness. This was Hera's particular genius. She did not simply punish. She perfected punishment. She found the exact form of suffering that would resonate most deeply with each victim. Echo's story is different from the others, not because Echo was Zeus's lover, but because she tried to help those who were. Echo was a mountain nymph, known throughout the forests for her beautiful voice and her love of conversation. She could talk for hours, weaving words into tapestries of sound, holding anyone's attention for as long as she wished. This gift would become her downfall. Zeus, as always, was pursuing nymphs in the mountains. The nymphs knew they were in danger, so they devised a plan. Whenever Hera came looking for her husband, Echo would intercept her. The talkative nymph would engage the queen in conversation, asking questions, telling stories, commenting on the weather and the flowers and anything else that came to mind. She would hold Hera's attention while the other nymphs fled and Zeus made his escape. But Hera was not foolish. She noticed the pattern. She realized that she was being manipulated, that this chattering nymph was deliberately obstructing her search. Her punishment was precise, as her punishments always were. Hera did not kill Echo. Instead, she took away the gift that Echo had used against her. From that day forward, Echo could not speak on her own. She could not initiate conversation, could not express her own thoughts, could not use words except to repeat what others had already said. The nymph who had loved talking more than anything else in the world was reduced to a mere echo, able only to reflect the voices of others, never to add her own. The cruelest part of Echo's fate came later, when she fell in love. Narcissus was a young hunter, so beautiful that everyone who saw him fell in love with him. But Narcissus loved no one. Echo saw him hunting one day and was immediately smitten. She followed him through the forest, wanting desperately to speak to him, but she could not. She could only repeat his words. Narcissus called out, asking who was there. "Who's there?" Echo called back, her voice emerging from the trees. "Come out," Narcissus said. "Come out," Echo repeated. "Let us meet each other," he said. "Let us meet each other," Echo agreed, stepping out from her hiding place. But Narcissus recoiled. He pushed her away, told her to leave him alone, rejected her completely and cruelly. Echo could not argue, could not plead, could not explain. She could only repeat his harsh words back to him, each repetition driving the knife deeper into her heart. She withdrew into the forest. She stopped eating, stopped drinking, stopped caring for herself at all. Her body wasted away until nothing remained but her voice, still echoing through the mountains, still repeating whatever sounds came to her, still waiting for words of love that would never arrive. Hera's punishment had taken everything from Echo, but it had not taken her existence. In some ways, that was the cruelest part. Echo continued to exist, aware of what she had lost, unable to die, unable to rest, trapped forever in the moment of her diminishment. Semele's destruction was more direct, and in some ways more terrible. Semele was a mortal princess, daughter of Cadmus, king of Thebes. Zeus came to her in disguised form, and she fell in love with him. When Hera learned of the affair, she approached Semele in disguise, taking the form of an old woman, a nurse who had cared for Semele since childhood. In this guise, she planted seeds of doubt. How do you know your lover is who he claims to be? If he truly loved you, he would prove himself. He would show you his real form. The words worked on Semele, and the next time Zeus came to her, she asked him to grant her a wish, any wish, without telling her first what she would request. Zeus agreed and swore by the river Styx, the most binding oath a god could make. Semele asked him to reveal his true form. Zeus tried to refuse, knowing no mortal could look upon a god's true form and survive. But he had sworn by the Styx. He revealed himself, the room filled with light and fire. Semele saw for one instant the true face of the king of the gods, and then she burned. Her mortal body could not contain what her eyes had witnessed. She was consumed, destroyed, reduced to ash in the space between one heartbeat and the next. But she was pregnant. The child within her was divine enough to survive what had killed its mother. Zeus snatched the unborn infant from Semele's burning womb and sewed it into his own thigh, carrying it there until it was ready to be born. The child was Dionysus, god of wine and ecstasy, who would eventually take his place among the Olympians. Semele was dead, destroyed by a wish that Hera had tricked her into making. The queen of the gods had not lifted a finger against her directly. She had simply provided the information and the suggestion, and Semele had destroyed herself. This was another form of Hera's power. She did not need to wield the thunderbolt. She only needed to whisper the right words at the right moment. But perhaps Hera's most complex vengeance was reserved for Heracles. Heracles was not just another illegitimate child of Zeus. He was the greatest of them, the hero whose labors would become legendary, whose strength would exceed that of any mortal who had ever lived or ever would. His very name meant glory of Hera, a designation that reads as either tribute or bitter irony, depending on how one interprets the relationship between goddess and hero. His mother was Alcmene, a mortal woman of exceptional virtue. Zeus desired her, but she was faithful to her husband Amphitryon. To have her, Zeus had to become Amphitryon, taking his exact form on a night when the real husband was away. Alcmene slept with what she believed was her own husband, never knowing that the king of the gods had violated not just her body but her trust. When Hera learned of the pregnancy, she began her persecution before the child was even born. Zeus had boasted that a descendant of Perseus born on a certain day would rule over all the surrounding kingdoms. Hera manipulated the timing. She delayed Heracles' birth while hastening the birth of Eurystheus, another descendant of Perseus. Eurystheus was born first, inheriting the kingdom that should have belonged to Heracles. This was political sabotage as much as personal vengeance. By manipulating the succession, Hera denied Zeus's favored son the power he had been promised. Heracles would be born a subject instead of a king, forced to serve the very cousin who had stolen his birthright. But the persecution did not end with birth. When Heracles was still an infant, Hera sent 2 enormous serpents to kill him in his cradle. The baby's mother woke to find her son strangling the serpents with his bare hands, the first demonstration of the incredible strength that would define his life. He was too powerful to kill so easily. Hera would have to find other ways. As Heracles grew, Hera watched and waited. He became a hero, accomplished great deeds, married a princess named Megara and had children with her. For a time, it seemed he might escape his persecutor's shadow. He had found happiness. He had found peace. And then Hera struck. She sent madness, a sudden, overwhelming insanity that descended upon Heracles without warning. In his delusion, he saw enemies where his family stood. He saw threats that did not exist. He attacked, fighting with all the strength that made him legend. When the madness lifted, Heracles found himself standing in a house of corpses. His wife, his children, his own hands had killed them. He could not remember doing it, but the evidence was undeniable. The greatest hero in the world had murdered his own family. This was Hera's masterpiece of cruelty. She did not simply kill Heracles, which might have been kinder. She made him into a monster. She made him destroy everything he loved. She ensured that no matter how many labors he completed, no matter how much glory he achieved, he would always carry the weight of what he had done. The 12 labors that followed were penance for these murders. Heracles submitted himself to Eurystheus, the cousin who had stolen his birthright, accepting whatever tasks the king demanded. Each labor was supposed to be impossible. Each was designed to kill him. The first labor sent Heracles against the Nemean lion. This was no ordinary beast. Its hide could not be pierced by any weapon. Not bronze, not iron, not the sharpest blade forged by the most skilled smith. Arrows bounced off its flanks. Swords skidded across its skin without leaving a mark. Heracles tracked the beast to its cave, a deep cavern with 2 entrances. He blocked one entrance with boulders, then entered through the other, carrying his great club and his bow. The lion was waiting for him in the darkness. Heracles fired arrow after arrow, but each one glanced away harmlessly. He swung his club with all his legendary strength, and the weapon shattered against the creature's skull. So Heracles did what no other hero would have dared. He threw aside his broken weapons and grappled with the beast directly. Man and lion rolled across the cave floor. The lion's claws raked against Heracles' flesh, drawing blood. But Heracles was stronger. Slowly, impossibly, he wrapped his arms around the lion's throat and began to squeeze. And finally, with a sound like a great wind dying, the Nemean lion went still. Heracles realized that only the lion's own claws were sharp enough to cut its skin. He used them to remove the pelt, and from that day forward he wore it as armor. The hide that no weapon could penetrate became his protection. When Heracles returned to Mycenae with the lion's pelt draped over his shoulders, Eurystheus was so terrified that he hid in a bronze jar and refused to come out for days. From then on, he delivered his orders through a herald, never facing Heracles directly. But Hera was not satisfied. The second labor was the Hydra of Lerna. The Hydra was a serpent of immense size, dwelling in the swamps. It had 9 heads, each one capable of delivering a venomous bite that meant instant death. But its most terrifying feature was its regeneration. For every head that was cut off, 2 more would grow in its place. Heracles approached the swamp with his nephew Iolaus. When he cut off a head, 2 new ones emerged. Then Hera intervened. She sent a giant crab to assist the Hydra, attacking Heracles from behind. He was fighting on two fronts now, surrounded by enemies. Heracles crushed the crab beneath his heel, but the distraction had given him an idea. He called to Iolaus, telling him to bring fire. While Heracles cut, Iolaus cauterized, burning each neck stump before new heads could grow. Finally, only the central head remained. This one was immortal. Heracles severed it anyway and buried it under a massive boulder, where it would remain forever, alive but trapped. The third labor brought Heracles to the Ceryneian hind. This was a deer with golden antlers and bronze hooves, sacred to the goddess Artemis. It was the fastest creature in the world, capable of outrunning an arrow in flight. Eurystheus demanded that Heracles capture it alive, knowing that even touching one of Artemis's sacred animals could bring the goddess's wrath. Heracles tracked the hind for an entire year. The hind did not tire. Neither did he. They ran through spring and summer, through autumn and winter. Finally, he cornered the hind at the river Ladon. He fired an arrow that passed between the tendons of its front legs, pinning them together without drawing blood. On his way back, Artemis herself appeared, furious. Heracles explained his situation honestly. He was performing labors forced by the gods themselves. Artemis recognized that Heracles was trapped by circumstances beyond his control. She allowed him to continue, but extracted his promise that the hind would be released unharmed. When he arrived at Mycenae, the hind sprang away, faster than thought, vanishing before Eurystheus could touch it. The fourth labor, capture the Erymanthian boar. This was a massive beast that lived on Mount Erymanthus. Heracles drove the boar into deep snow, where it became exhausted and could not escape. He bound it with chains and carried it back on his shoulders. Eurystheus was so frightened by the sight of the beast that he jumped into his bronze jar again. The fifth labor was different from the others. Clean the Augean stables. King Augeas of Elis had the largest herds of cattle in Greece. Their stables had not been cleaned in years, perhaps decades. The accumulated filth was immense, a mountain of manure that no amount of shoveling could ever remove. Eurystheus thought this task would humiliate Heracles. It was not heroic to shovel dung. It was not glorious to wade through filth. But Heracles was clever as well as strong. He did not pick up a shovel. Instead, he went to the rivers Alpheus and Punius and diverted their courses. He channeled the flowing water through the stables, and in a single day, the accumulated filth of years was washed away. The sixth labor sent Heracles against the Stymphalian birds. These were man-eating birds with beaks of bronze and feathers that could be launched like arrows. They had been sacred to Ares, the god of war, but had grown so numerous that they were destroying the countryside around Lake Stymphalia. Their droppings were toxic, poisoning the land wherever they roost. Heracles could not reach the birds directly. They nested in a swamp so thick with vegetation that no man could walk through it. They flew too high and too fast to be shot down one by one. There were simply too many of them. Athena appeared to help him. She gave him a rattle made by Hephaestus, a device that produced the most terrible noise imaginable. Heracles climbed a nearby mountain and shook the rattle. The sound drove the birds into the sky in a panic. As they flew overhead, he shot them down with his poisoned arrows, killing them by the hundreds until the survivors fled and never returned. The seventh labor took Heracles to Crete. King Minos possessed a magnificent bull, a gift from Poseidon. The god had sent it from the sea, expecting Minos to sacrifice it in his honor. But the bull was so beautiful that Minos kept it for himself, sacrificing an inferior animal instead. Poseidon was furious at this disrespect. He drove the bull mad, making it rampage across Crete, destroying crops and buildings and killing anyone in its path. Heracles wrestled the Cretan bull into submission and brought it back to Greece. Eurystheus wanted to sacrifice it to Hera, but the goddess refused the offering. She would not accept anything that Heracles had touched. The bull was released and wandered to Marathon, where it continued to cause destruction until Theseus killed it. The eighth labor concerned the mares of Diomedes. Diomedes was a king of Thrace, a brutal man who fed his horses on human flesh. The mares were wild, vicious, capable of tearing a man apart in seconds. No one could approach them safely. No one could control them. Heracles traveled to Thrace with a band of companions. He overpowered Diomedes's guards and drove the mares down to the sea. When Diomedes came to recover his animals, Heracles killed him and fed his body to his own horses. The taste of their master's flesh calmed them, and they became docile enough to be led back to Mycenae. During the fighting, one of Heracles' companions, a young man named Abderus, was left to guard the mares. They killed and ate him before Heracles could return. In his memory, Heracles founded the city of Abdera on the site of his death. The ninth labor was to obtain the belt of Hippolyta. Hippolyta was the queen of the Amazons, a nation of warrior women who lived on the edges of the known world. She possessed a golden belt given to her by Ares, a symbol of her authority and her prowess in battle. Eurystheus' daughter wanted the belt, and so Heracles was sent to retrieve it. He sailed to the land of the Amazons with a ship full of heroes. When they arrived, Hippolyta came down to the harbor to meet them. She was impressed by Heracles' reputation and agreed to give him the belt willingly. There would be no need for conflict. But Hera could not allow the labor to be completed so easily. She disguised herself as an Amazon and moved through the crowd, spreading a rumor that Heracles had come to kidnap their queen. The Amazons attacked. In the battle that followed, Heracles killed Hippolyta, believing she had betrayed him. He took the belt from her body and fought his way back to his ship. Many Amazons died. Many of his companions died. What should have been a peaceful exchange became a massacre. This was Hera's way. Even when Heracles was about to succeed, she found methods to complicate his victory, to add blood and sorrow to his achievements, to ensure that his glory was always shadowed by loss. The 10th labor sent Heracles to the western edge of the world. Geryon was a giant with 3 bodies joined at the waist, the most powerful warrior in the world. He lived on the island of Erythea, beyond the setting sun, where he kept a herd of beautiful red cattle. Heracles was to steal these cattle and bring them back to Greece. The journey alone was an epic. Heracles traveled across North Africa, through lands no Greek had ever seen. When he reached the strait between Europe and Africa, he found his way blocked by mountains. He split them apart, creating the Pillars of Heracles, the gateway to the Atlantic Ocean. On Erythea, he faced Geryon's guardians. Then Geryon himself came forth, 6 arms wielding weapons, 3 minds thinking strategy. They fought and Heracles won, driving an arrow through all 3 bodies at once. He drove the cattle back toward Greece, but the journey was as difficult as the battle. Hera sent a gadfly to scatter the herd. Giants tried to steal them. Rivers flooded to block his path. At every step, obstacles appeared and had to be overcome. Eventually, exhausted but triumphant, he delivered the cattle to Eurystheus. The king sacrificed them to Hera, who accepted this time. The 11th labor sought the apples of the Hesperides. At the western edge of the world, in a garden beyond the sunset, grew a tree that bore golden apples. This tree was a wedding gift from Gaia to Hera, and it was guarded by the Hesperides, nymphs who tended it, and by Ladon, a dragon with 100 heads that never slept. No one knew exactly where this garden was. Along the way, he freed Prometheus from his eternal punishment. In gratitude, Prometheus told him how to obtain the apples. He could not simply take them. The apples could only be picked by one of the Hesperides or by Atlas, the Titan who held the sky on his shoulders. Heracles found Atlas and offered a bargain. If Atlas would fetch the apples, Heracles would hold the sky in his absence. Atlas agreed eagerly. Heracles took the burden on his own shoulders, and Atlas walked away toward the garden. He returned with the apples but announced that he had no intention of taking back the sky. Heracles pretended to accept this. He asked only that Atlas hold the sky for one moment while he adjusted his cloak for comfort. Atlas, not suspecting the trick, took back his burden. Heracles picked up the apples and walked away. The 12th and final labor was to bring Cerberus from the underworld. Cerberus was the three-headed dog that guarded the entrance to Hades, preventing the dead from escaping and the living from entering. No mortal had ever captured him. Before descending, Heracles was initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries. Thus purified, he found the entrance to Hades and went down. The underworld was full of terrors, but Heracles faced them all. He wrestled with ghosts. He found Theseus and Pirithous trapped in chairs of forgetfulness. He freed Theseus. Finally, he came before Hades himself and asked permission to borrow Cerberus. The god of the dead agreed on one condition. Heracles must subdue the beast using no weapons, only his bare hands. Heracles found Cerberus at the gates of Hades. The three heads snarled and snapped. But Heracles was the strongest mortal who had ever lived. He wrestled the beast into submission, choking it until it could no longer resist. He dragged Cerberus up to the surface, into the sunlight that the dog had never seen. He brought it to Mycenae and showed it to Eurystheus, who was so terrified that he begged Heracles to take it back immediately. The labor was complete. After years of service, Heracles was finally free. He had completed every task, survived every danger, overcome every obstacle that Hera and Eurystheus had placed in his path. He was purified of the blood guilt for killing his family. He was the greatest hero the world had ever known. But his story was not over, and neither was his relationship with Hera. The final chapter of that relationship would only be written when he died and rose to Olympus. And then, at last, he and Hera were reconciled. She gave him her daughter Hebe as a wife. The goddess who had tormented him throughout his mortal life welcomed him into the divine family. The name that had seemed like a curse, glory of Hera, finally became truth. The story of Hephaestus reveals another side of Hera, darker and more troubling. Hephaestus was Hera's son, though the myths disagree about whether Zeus was his father. Some say Hera produced him alone, without any male involvement, as revenge for Zeus producing Athena from his own head. Others say he was conceived normally but born with a difference that made him unacceptable to his mother. Hephaestus was lame. In a world of perfect divine bodies, his legs were twisted, his gait unsteady. He could not walk like other gods. He could not move with the effortless grace that characterized Olympian existence. Hera looked at her son and felt something that the myths call shame. She had produced a child who was less than perfect, a god who would invite ridicule rather than admiration. In her pride, in her determination to maintain the dignity she had fought so hard to establish, she could not accept him. She threw him from Olympus. The fall lasted an entire day, according to the myths. Hephaestus tumbled through the sky, past the clouds, past the birds, down toward the sea that glittered far below. When he finally landed on the island of Lemnos, the impact completed what birth had begun. His legs, already damaged, were broken beyond repair. He would be lame forever, his mother's rejection written permanently into his body. But Hephaestus did not die. The sea goddesses Thetis and Eurynomy found him on the beach and raised him as their own. He grew up in a cave beneath the sea, far from Olympus, far from the mother who had discarded him. And in that cave he discovered his gift. Hephaestus had the hands of a maker. What his legs could not do, his hands could do magnificently. He began to forge, to shape, to create things of such beauty and craftsmanship that even the gods would eventually covet them. The lame boy became the divine smith, his disability compensated by ability that exceeded all others. When he grew to adulthood, Hephaestus decided to return to Olympus. But he did not come seeking reconciliation. He came seeking revenge. He crafted a throne. It was the most beautiful seat ever made, gleaming with gold and silver, adorned with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and dance in the light. He sent it to Olympus as a gift for his mother, a peace offering from a son who had every reason to hate her. Hera was delighted. She admired the throne's beauty. She sat upon it without hesitation, and she found herself trapped. Invisible bonds held her in place. No matter how she struggled, no matter how the other gods tried to help her, she could not rise. The throne that had seemed like a gift was a prison, and only Hephaestus had the key. Dionysus with wine got the smith drunk, led him back to Olympus, and eventually persuaded him to release his mother. But the release came with conditions. Hephaestus demanded his place among the Olympians. He demanded respect. He demanded, most significantly, the hand of Aphrodite, the most beautiful goddess, as his wife. Hera rejected Hephaestus, and Hephaestus returned to imprison her. The child she threw away became the craftsman who made her captive. Her cruelty circled back to trap her. There came a moment when Hera's patience finally broke completely. For years, she had endured Zeus's affairs. She had punished his lovers, persecuted his children, raged against the endless stream of betrayals that made her position as wife both exalted and humiliating. But she had never directly challenged Zeus himself. Until she did. Hera organized a rebellion. She convinced Poseidon to join her and Athena and perhaps Apollo. They moved against him while he slept. They bound him with chains, 100 knots that should have held even the king of the gods. When Zeus woke, he found himself powerless, his divine strength useless against the bonds that held him. For a moment, perhaps, Hera tasted triumph. But the moment did not last. The sea goddess Thetis summoned help. She called upon Briareus, one of the 100-handed ones. Briareus came to Olympus and freed the king with his 100 hands. Zeus was free, and Zeus was furious. He punished the conspirators, but he reserved the harshest punishment for Hera. He hung her from the sky with golden chains, her wrists bound, heavy anvils attached to her feet. She dangled between heaven and earth, stretched by the weights, unable to escape or even to rest. The myths do not say how long she hung there. Long enough for the lesson to sink in. When Zeus finally released her, Hera returned to her throne. She was still queen, but she had learned that her queenship had boundaries, that her power existed only within the space Zeus allowed. The Trojan War brought Hera's fury to a different stage. The war's origins trace back to a wedding, the marriage of Peleus and Thetis. Eris threw a golden apple with the inscription, "For the fairest." 3 goddesses claimed the apple: Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Zeus delegated the decision to a mortal. Paris was a prince of Troy, tending his flocks on the slopes of Mount Ida. It was there that Hermes brought the 3 goddesses for judgment. Hera offered power. She would make Paris ruler of all Asia. Athena offered wisdom and skill in battle. Aphrodite offered love. She promised Paris the most beautiful woman in the world as his wife. Paris gave the apple to Aphrodite. Hera and Athena left Mount Ida together, their faces calm, their fury bottomless. A shepherd boy had looked at the queen of Olympus and decided that she was not beautiful enough. The insult was absolute. It would be repaid in blood. Throughout the war, Hera supported the Greeks with everything at her disposal. She intervened on the battlefield, protecting Greek heroes, hindering Trojan advances. At one point, she seduced Zeus to distract him. Her own body turned to tactical purpose. Troy fell eventually, the city burned, and Hera's vengeance was complete. But what had the vengeance accomplished? Thousands of men had died, and at the end of it all, the insult remained. Paris had still chosen Aphrodite. The judgment could not be undone. As the ages passed, Hera became a symbol. She was marriage itself, the institution that organized society. She was the protector of women, particularly in the vulnerable moments of life. Her temples were among the most important in Greece. At Argos, she was the primary deity, more significant even than Zeus in local worship. Some scholars believe that Hera was originally an independent deity, perhaps the chief goddess of an earlier religious system. The Romans inherited the Greek gods. Hera became Juno, the queen of the Roman pantheon. But Roman Juno was different, more dignified, less defined by conflict. The stories of jealousy and vengeance did not disappear, but the emphasis shifted. The fierce, proud, angry goddess who refused to accept humiliation became a more domesticated figure. In the end, what are we to make of Hera? The myths give us a goddess defined by conflict. Whatever sympathy we might feel for Hera's situation does not excuse the harm she caused. But there is also no way to fully condemn her without acknowledging the situation that produced the cruelty. Hera could not punish Zeus. Every time she tried to act against him directly, she was defeated. The only targets she could reach were those weaker than herself. This is what power does when it is constrained. It flows downward. She was cruel because she was trapped. She was vindictive because she was powerless. And through it all, she survived. She did not accept her situation. She did not pretend that Zeus's betrayals did not matter. She did not smile and endure and disappear into graceful silence. She raged. She fought. She held onto her dignity when dignity was impossible. She demanded respect when respect was withheld. She refused to be diminished even by a god who could have destroyed her with a thought. There is something human in the goddess who would not accept what should not have been acceptable. Night falls over Olympus. In the great hall of the gods, the throne of the queen remains occupied. Hera sits as she has always sat, straight-backed and watchful, her eyes missing nothing. She has seen everything there is to see. She has endured everything there is to endure. And still she sits, and still she watches, and still she refuses to accept what she has never accepted. The myths do not show us her inner life. They show us what she does, but not what she feels. Perhaps the Greeks understood that the inner life of a goddess betrayed and trapped and raging is not something that can be reduced to words. She is still here in some way that matters. The idea of her persists, the image of a goddess who was wronged and who refused to pretend otherwise. Somewhere in the human imagination, Hera still sits on her throne, still watches, still waits. The queen of Olympus, the goddess of marriage, the wife who would not forgive, the woman behind all the myths, hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to finally see her clearly. Hera. Whatever else we say about her, we cannot say she was forgotten. And for a goddess who spent eternity fighting against diminishment, that persistence is its own kind of victory.